Welcome to We Are Human Leaders. When you're here with us, you're part of the global community driving change. Each conversation is an invitation to grow, question, and co-create a future where people, business, and society flourish together. And we, myself Alexis, and my co-host Sally Clark, are here to guide you on this journey, connecting you to big ideas, bold conversations, and brave questions that will help you live and lead more human every day. Today's guest is Megan Reitz, an Associate Fellow at Said Business School at Oxford University. And she's a Professor of Leadership and Dialogue at Hult International Business School. Megan's research focuses on how we can create the conditions for transformative dialogue at work. And her research is at the intersection of leadership, change, dialogue, and mindfulness. Megan has written a number of brilliant books, including her most recent, Speak Out, Listen Up, which is a second edition of her best-selling book, Speak Up. Now, this conversation was quite profound for Sally and I, and I'd love to hear from you, Sal. What was one of the key takeaways for you from this conversation with Megan?
For me, Lex, I think it's the fact that there is a place in leadership and in our work lives for the concept of spacious thinking. So what we traditionally have contextualized as something that is sort of outside of, we just should be doing, we need to be achieving, we need to be doing in order to be productive. Her research really flips that notion on its head. And this conversation just unpacks so clearly, not just why we should be embracing spacious thinking, but also how we can. That was a huge takeaway for me. How about you?
I love that. And I think for me, it was also how spaciousness really is quite a courageous step right now.
Yeah.
We've sort of been conditioned to believe that being always on, hustle culture, busyness is the mode of being that we need to be in to reach success. And I think Megan's conversation was really a call to action to say, actually, that's not what we need to be successful. There is an opportunity to be courageous and step outside that really small box that we've created for ourselves and what success looks like, both in life and in leadership. So this conversation, as I said, for Sally and I was super profound. We cannot wait for you to hear it. Now, let's dive in. Welcome to We Are Human Leaders, Megan. It's such a privilege to have you here with us today. And we want to start by asking a question that we think many leaders in the modern work environment are struggling with, and that is the concept of busyness. Can you help us understand what are the dangers of busyness and what should we be aiming for instead?
Right, that's a very relevant question at the moment. I think whenever I'm with groups, organizational groups now, the level of busyness, it even comes through into the classroom. You can see that people are trying to multitask. They're trying to do multiple things at the same time. Probably best, in order to answer that question, and I'll do it succinctly, it's probably best just to introduce these two modes of attention. I'll tell you why in a second. So in our research, we've been researching conversations in organizations for over a decade now. So we're really interested, myself and John Higgins, my co-researcher, we're very interested in what it means to be in dialogue, what it means to have conversations that matter at work, and indeed which conversations do matter at work. And in our most recent research, we've looked at what we pay attention to. And there are these two modes, and I know we'll go into more detail on them, but we have a mode that we call the doing mode. And this is where busyness belongs. The doing mode is instrumental. We have goals that we're looking to achieve. We want to control things. We want to predict things. We want to get stuff done at pace. And there's also another mode called the spacious mode, which is unhurried, which is more expansive, which looks at possibilities and insight. Now, the problem in many organizational systems, but it's much bigger than organizational world, it's also present very much in healthcare, in education, is that we have become what we call in our research pathologically busy. We've overdone the doing mode. We've become so attached to doing. We've become so sure that activity is the sign of success. We are so focused on short-term tangible targets that many of us now are forgetting that there even is a spacious mode, and we certainly can't find one. So in terms of the dangers of busyness, and obviously there's a pile of health, mental and physical health issues when we're so busy and we don't pause and we don't allow ourselves to pause. Yes, of course, let's find the business case, because of course we've got to do that. The business case around busyness is eventually a reduction in productivity, which is ironic because that's the very thing we're trying to improve. But, in terms of what I'm really interested in, if we're living this life pathologically busy, if we are permanently in doing mode, looking at achievement, where on earth is the space to be human? Where is the space to be creative, to find joy, those sorts of things? So that's the case against busyness for me.
Incredible, Megan. And I think it resonates for so many people listening, this concept of doing as being sort of the sole metric by which we measure our value as humans, particularly in the work environment. We're all sort of addicted to our to-do lists, ticking things off. It makes me think of my time as a lawyer being, measured by the billable hour. It's all about doing, and sort of anytime you lift your foot off of the accelerator, it's like, well, why would you do that when we could be more productive? And the irony being, I think it really is quite a counter intuitive point for us to understand, is that the spacious mode also gives rise to higher productivity. I think it's something that leaders are really grappling with right now. We see, a number of countries around the world where productivity really is a big pressing issue at this moment. And yet we're still sort of leaning on these old modalities of like, just do more somehow, do more with less, do more with less. And I think it's really interesting to think of these different options available to us as individuals. We're going to delve deeper into this concept of the sort of the spacious mode shortly, Megan, but I know some of your research also touches on mindfulness, which is a topic a lot of our listeners are very much interested in. There was kind of historically, I think, quite a lot of pushback against mindfulness in the workplace, sort of seen more as a sort of a woo-woo thing, or perhaps a bit spiritual. What role does that have for our sort of careers as well? What do you think is the power of mindfulness for leaders? And does that actually connect back into that productivity question as well?
Yes, good question. So mindfulness is something that has been had a little bit of poor press, as you say. I think that's for two main reasons. One is there's a misunderstanding around what mindfulness means. I mean, if you go into a bookshop, there'll be a massive bookcase on mindfulness, and it'll have everything from mindful eating to mindful dog walking to mindful knitting. So it'll have absolutely everything. You've got mindful bath salts, for goodness sake. So there is a very blurry understanding of what we mean in mindfulness. And of course, that means it's not taken seriously in the doing world of the corporate environment that wants to see credibility. Also, just to say that one of the problems as well with mindfulness in the workplace is that it has historically focused primarily on individual mindfulness. So how can you look after your mental health? Meanwhile, we'll create a completely toxic environment and we'll work the hell out of you, but it's your responsibility to be mindful, and then we'll all be fine. Yeah. So there's been this kind of sticking plaster approach, which also means that it hasn't really hit home the value of it in the corporate world. In my research with Michael Chaskelson, we look at mindfulness as our capacity to create some space in our mind where we can choose our response. So mindfulness is our capacity to pay attention in the present moment. It's our capacity for something that we call meta-awareness. So we're able to know what we're thinking and what we're feeling or what we're sensing in this present moment. And what that allows us to do when we're also curious and when we're also allowing our current experience to be as it is, when we've got those three kind of things present, our research showed that it creates this little space for people. So when we're looking at things like habit change, you can't change any habit unless you notice what you're doing in the moment that you're about to do it. So no habit change can happen unless you spot that you're about to do what you've always done and then choose something different. And that's what mindfulness gives us the capacity to do. It gives us the capacity to go, oh, hang on a second. Let me just pause. Let me think about this bit. I'm going to choose to do something different. That is at the utter heart of all leadership development processes. It's at the heart of our capacity to build successful relationships. It's at the heart of our ability to be creative, but also to make wise strategic decisions. So that space in our mind where we consider and we choose rather than go on autopilot is at the heart of why it's so valuable in the workplace. But that's not a common understanding of mindfulness. As I said, there's a sort of blurriness about it that doesn't help.
It's an interesting point, Megan, because I feel mindfulness, much like the word well-being in organizations, people seem to think it's something that you do. It's not necessarily an outcome of other things that you do, if that makes sense. Like we, Sally and I so often talk with organizational leaders around how do we create a workplace of well-being? And it's like, well, well-being is an outcome of the right systems in place to promote human beings flourishing in the workplace. That well-being is an outcome. And I feel like we hear mindfulness spoken about a little bit in that way as well. Like how do we just use mindfulness in our organization as, you know, something to drive outcomes? But I think in the same way, mindfulness is something we move towards as a trait-like way of being. That kind of, to me, feels like how you've explained it here. It's something that with intention and practice over time, we actually build into a way of being. Does that feel like it kind of resonates for you and
Yes,
what you're
absolutely.
seeing in the research as well?
Yeah, and if you go back to these ideas of doing and spacious mode, of course, we really like to do stuff. We like to,
We do.
and you know, there's no difference there in terms of mindfulness. It's right. Okay, how do we do that? What do I have to do in order to create this outcome? And
Execute on mindfulness.
Exactly. And, you know, part of that is really relevant and valid and useful and helpful because we do know actually that you practice mindfulness. So there is a practice and a habit that can be really helpful there. But as I said, when it's instrumentally understood, particularly in learning and development situations where it's like, I mean, the amount of times I've been asked to do, you know, an hour and a half on mindfulness with a corporate group on a leadership development program. Again, that's helpful if it instigates a kind of interest and a curiosity that is then taken on. But, you know, it's not going to suddenly make 24 people mindful. It is much more something that we work at each day, and it is not only a cognitive experience, it's also very much an embodied experience as well. And yes, that gets lost in our desire to be instrumental and efficient in our mindfulness practice.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I feel as well the idea sort of concepts like rest and spaciousness, as you've mentioned, they're also being kind of weaponized in that way in the workplace, because we know that when we can be in those states, we can become more productive as a result. So we're almost trying to force ourselves into those states as a way of being more productive rather than just to be in those states.
There's a bit of an irony, well, more than a bit of an irony, in both my mindfulness research and my research on spaciousness. And in order to be heard and understood, these ideas need to land credibly inside systems that are pretty much obsessed with productivity and a very narrow view of that. So part of what we're doing in our research on spaciousness and with mindfulness really, but especially recently, is to come up with a language that's acceptable, that's credible, that's understood inside systems that are very much of the doing mode. So it's the problem is if you go too far with that, it gets very quickly turned into the next instrumental tool that's going to be rolled out. You can hear the language, rolled out and cascaded in the next development program. And what we're just, and ironically, that's where people's heads go to when there isn't space to just pause and experience, and really reflect on the kind of things that we're talking about. So it's this rush, rush, rush. And as a researcher, I'm playing this game, I suppose, of kind of meeting a system and using credible language, but also making sure that the whole idea doesn't suddenly run away and become yet another, thing that we do.
It's such a tough one, isn't it, Megan? Because I think we end up with quite a diluted, concept at the end, because we've had to sort of repackage and sort of squish it into a form that is actually sort of tolerated, when, I think it's quite some magic to be able to find that sort of balance of retaining the essence of what the, spaciousness and spacious thinking. And I think this is the moment in the conversation where we really need to hold some space for that, because I'd love to understand a little bit more about how you think about spacious thinking, whether there's a definition, and how, sort of anyone listening can sort of understand what that might actually feel like.
So just before I answer that, with a nice, neat definition for everybody, I would like to just pause and ask the people that are listening to just take a moment and recall a time when they experienced a sense of spaciousness. So I'd love to ask both of you, actually. So just pause and, doesn't have to be something, out of this world. I'm not talking about anything massive, but just an experience when you had a sense of more spaciousness than normal, put it that way. I wonder kind of, what occasions or what that experience was like. I'd love to hear just a couple of things from you, and I'd love the listeners to be thinking about this for themselves as well.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the last time for me where I experienced spaciousness would have been maybe a few days ago on the weekend, when I was enjoying a walk at sunset down at the beach. So for me, I think it often is in the moments where I'm doing a lot less and I'm in an environment that sort of gets me out of the four walls of my office and off a screen, where I can sort of feel the expansiveness of nature and things like that around me as well. So I think that's probably the last time for me. What about you, Sal?
It's such a great question. The one that springs to mind is actually quite similar to yours, Lex, and that was a few weeks ago. I was walking here on the surf coast, and I saw whales out in the ocean, and I had this immediate sense of kind of an awareness of the height of the cliffs and the depth of the water, and this sort of zooming out experience in my body that made me feel both small and special at the same time. It was a really, really lovely, very in the moment sort of experience, and quite visceral in my body. That would be the last time that I experienced, I think, that sense so profoundly, for certain.
I think I'm just going to have to move to Australia, aren't I?
Have we sold you?
Oh, God, that's lovely.
Come.
So very specifically in our research, we've always asked people just to consider their own experience. And this is another irony in the research, is that as soon as you give somebody a definition, it already narrows their perspective and their experience, because it's like, okay, how can I fit to Megan's expert definition on what spaciousness is? And actually the more valuable work really genuinely is in inviting others to consider, well, what does it mean for you? What opens up space? What role does it have in your life? And how might you, if you need to, how might you invite a bit more of that in? Having said that, of course, we've asked hundreds of people now about their experiences of spaciousness. There's a few things that crop up very frequently. One is it's an expansive, as you mentioned, it's expansive awareness. When we're focused on our to-do list, we tend to have a narrow attention on a particular thing. And, it's instrumental. We see the goal as separate to ourselves, and it's something that we do. In the spacious mode, we are much more open and aware. We're looking up, we're looking around. And we're also, rather than seeing things as separate and us as separate, we're paying attention to interdependencies, interrelationships, emergence, systems. So rather than seeing the world as static and fixed, we're seeing the world in flow. So we are actually seeing that. And of course, when we see the world in that way, we make very different choices about how to be and how to behave in it and how to act in it than we do when we're kind of seeing ourselves as separate and moving things around a chessboard. So there's this expansiveness. There's something around interrelationships, interconnections. There's something around being unhurried. So a lot of our lives, I speak for myself here, I spend a lot of my life kind of thinking, somewhere in my narrative brain, there's a little voice saying, oh, I must, oh, I should, oh, I need to, oh, I can't, I have to. There's constantly something going on. And in the expansive mode, that pauses. So we're not grasping for what's coming next. We are very here and present in this moment. And we have an attitude of openness and curiosity. So there's this sort of looking for, but not grasping for, but being open to possibilities and insight. So that's the spacious mode. And as you can imagine, it is experienced in very different ways. And it leads to action. When we then turn to the doing mode, we tend to do different things than we would if we'd been, attending and experiencing the world in that mode only.
An interesting point that you mentioned there, Megan, was this idea of the sort of interconnectedness of things around us. For me, I really didn't come to concepts like mindfulness until my mid to late 20s, and really from a place of need, from a place of trying to explain things like grief and dissatisfaction in my life. And prior to that, I would have considered myself a pretty selfish person, but I didn't have the hindsight to really see that until after I'd had these experiences. And I can honestly say that now I feel like I have a capacity to more deeply care for other people and experience empathy at a deeper level than I did previously. And I think it is, for me, part of this feeling of the interconnectedness to everything around me, and not just other human beings, but, in Sally's example with the whales in the ocean, we're so fortunate to have those experiences and think, wow, like we're sharing this earth with creatures in such an incredible and magnificent way. And I think for me, that was one of the most profound opportunities gifted to me through like a practice of mindfulness or the experience of spaciousness. And to link that to an organization, I think your decisions around your team and your relationships and even the vision of a company gets drastically different when you have this kind of metacognitive viewpoint. Would you say that that's the experience that you see with some of the leaders you maybe work with as well?
Yeah, I think, take the example of, I don't know, emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence and empathy gets taught. And very often in business schools, it gets taught as this helps productivity. You must empathize. This is how you do.
It's good for business.
And it's good for business. That has a place. Look, that has a place, but you can see how that is framing the world in that doing mode. It's like it's such an instrumental way of doing things and looking at things. In the spacious mode, it's kind of like a no-brainer. Rather than thinking I have to now do this EQ empathy thing in order to get productivity, in the spacious mode, it becomes very apparent that how we show up is affecting the other person's voice. How they are showing is affecting ourselves. We're much more attuned to how connected we are. And therefore, it sort of becomes slightly inevitable that we care more because we see it. And so kind of with this
Absolutely.
research, we're trying to, without making it a bit confusing for people, this is the utter fundamental nature of how we encounter and see the world. In the educational academic world, it's our ontology. It's the way that we see the world around us. And that then infuses everything that we do. And we have come to see the world in a particular way. And whilst we can then try and shift things in the same mode, what we're trying to do is question the very way that we're paying attention in the first place, if that makes
It does. Makes
Absolutely.
much sense.
And it reminds me of, I think there's just so many sort of interconnected components to it from a psychology perspective, from a sociology perspective, and certainly from a leadership development perspective. And just one thing that I'm thinking, Megan, is this kind of, a lot of what we're taught is, and not everyone, if you're listening, you can't see me, but I've got my palms facing down and my fingers clenched. It's this really sort of controlling model, and this clenching, this tightening, this gripping in order to control and to sort of squeeze out an outcome. And what I feel like with spaciousness is this flipping of the palms up so that our palms are open, our hands are relaxed, and we're in a receptive mode. Does that resonate for you in terms of that kind of almost a visualization of what that shift is like and what that gives rise to?
Yes, that's a nice metaphor. This desire to control and predict leads us into a place of anxiety very often. And when we're anxious, it's very difficult to have expansive, spacious thinking. Having said that, I wouldn't want anybody to get the impression that this spaciousness is kind of lovely and, rosy and with slightly soft edges. And this is a, beautiful place to be. There are very good reasons why most of us are avoiding the spacious mode. So we are, as somebody in our research just put it so well, somebody said, if you open up space, you let doubt in. And who wants that? Which I thought was just a fabulous quote. And, is appropriate in our workplaces and our teams. If we pause and we look up and we look around, we tend to be a hop, skip, and a jump away from some quite serious questions. It sort of invites us to go, so what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What mistakes have we made in the past? What courage do I now need to alter things because I'm facing up to what's happening? What can't I control? What will I never control? So these very fundamental philosophical questions actually are very close when we open up the spaciousness mode. And for that very reason, many of us spend a lot of time just being as busy as possible. So then we don't have to actually consider them.
Relatable.
Yeah, I totally relate to that, Megan, because I think for me, especially as a young leader, the more I could hurry and the busier I was, the less time I had to think about whether or not what I was doing was even useful, whether I was even useful, whether I was any bloody good at this or not. And it's much easier to avoid that discomfort just by living life at a sprint, which is what I did until my, early 30s. And Sal has a burnout story of her own from doing, living life at a sprint as well. So I think for many of us, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, if that makes sense. But I'd love to ask a question because I do feel like I genuinely have experienced a sort of before and after of this experience. And I'm sure there are a lot of leaders now who are listening and conceptually are grasping what we're saying, but are thinking to themselves, well, what the heck does that mean? Like, how do I go about creating spaciousness? Can you help us, Megan, with that? Where do we begin if this is something that we want to invite into our lives and into our leadership?
Yeah. So the very first thing to say is that nothing happens unless there's a level of awareness that there are these different modes of attention in the first place. So the very first thing, and the thing that we're really aiming at with our research, is to allow people to notice the busyness pattern, to notice the obsession with doing, to realize what kind of else is there and what else is possible and what they might be missing with the spacious mode, and to give it language. So to give it language that's credible enough to to survive in the corporate setting. So that's the very first thing is like, pause, what's happening here? And very often that, as I said, that is quite a scary question. So it can be quite helpful to have somebody else help you with that. But in our research, again, with full irony acknowledged about the spacious and the doing mode, we've come up with an acronym that spells SPACE, which is for those people saying, okay, Megan, enough of this. What do I do? What do I have to do to create space?
This is so us. We love an acronym.
So do I. So these are some of the things that have come up again in our research. So S stands for safety. So I guess this is particularly relevant, in our team setting at work, but also from an individual perspective. When we feel unsafe, we narrow our perception. So our attention goes much more narrow. So how do we create a sense of safety at work? That's most of my research the last 10 years is in something called Speaking Truth to Power. And it's how we examine things like power and status and authority and how that creates situations where we're often quite fearful and then we can't enter this spacious mode. So and please do ask me some more detail in some of these, but I'll briefly go over the acronym. So there's stuff around physical, personal, mental safety. P stands for people. So as I've mentioned a couple of times, when we open up space, it can be a little bit disorientating, a bit anxiety provoking, but there are people that can help us. We all know people that are somehow able to help us to pause, look up, look around in a way that we can still be engaged. And in the workplace, of course, that might be facilitators, coaches, mentors, therapists, colleagues, friends. So these people in our lives that just help us get into this sort of more spacious mode. Make sure we hang around with them. Try not to hang around so much, especially on social media, with groups that narrow our attention. So that's the people one. A stands for attention. We can train this. You'll know as mindfulness practitioners, there is a lot we can do with training our attention, and yet we don't. We leave it up to chance, which is still one of the most remarkable things I just don't understand why we all leave our attention up to chance. But there's also things in that block which is around metrics. What do we measure? Because what we measure tends to sort of shine a torchlight in a particular direction, and then everyone's attention goes there. So we need to examine, what are we measuring? What are we setting for ourselves? Is that the wisest thing to connect with success? And the final thing in attention, there's quite a lot in attention. There's things that we call speed bumps. So in a very packed and busy day, what are the small little speed bumps that we can initiate, whether they're a quick walk outside, whether they're a stare out the window if you don't even have time to walk outside. They're little occasions that are just enough to pause and help us to reorientate. C stands for conflict, which is a really interesting one. And by this, we don't mean relationship conflict. We mean dissonance. So something that kind of wakes us up because it's different. And that could be the environment, that could be a person, that could be reading a book, that could be suddenly going on a sabbatical or spending time with a customer or a stakeholder that's enough for us to kind of go, oh, hang on a second, things are a little bit different than I had experienced in my narrow perspective. And the final one, E, is environment. As you mentioned in your examples earlier on, the physical environment has a huge impact on the way that we think and the way that we feel. And so we are still remarkably uncreative at work in terms of where and how we run our meetings. So the difference, for example, between, sitting in our office, if we're lucky enough to have one, and having a conversation versus going for a walk outside for 45 minutes and having the conversation with somebody that way. The difference it makes between face-to-face or virtual, all these little decisions around environment affect the conversation that we have and affect the attention that we can give it. And yet, as I said, ironically, we don't actually pay attention much to the environment that we're in. So those are 5 things that we've written about in much more kind of detail with examples, but they are some stuff that I hope will keep those of us that are wanting to do stuff busy for a little while.
It's so powerful, Megan. And thank you so much for sharing some very practical ways of starting to sort of lean into this more spacious way of thinking. And one through line that I heard there was really this sort of just really shifting our perspective, seeking to shift our perspective to change it to, like, as you said, whether it's different environments, different people, just really making sure that we're not getting stuck in a bubble. And I do think it's also a little bit this, because of the busyness, which can so easily give rise to a sense of chronic stress, as you mentioned, that kind of narrowing of vision, we get sort of stuck in a rut. We don't even see it anymore because we're so sort of in that mode. And I think this is a real call to action for all of us to really reevaluate how we are, creating perspective for ourselves, the kind of conversations we're having, where we're putting ourselves in the way of different thinking, different ideas, different places, different people. So I really appreciate that very sort of strong, I think, call to action for all of us. How are we looking after our attention? How are we taking ownership of it, as you alluded to as well? Because I think all too often it's kind of just left up to devices, more or less, to drive that. So some really powerful insights there. I'm so excited for your book to eventuate, but also to sort of, delve more deeply into the articles, I think, to understand what we can be doing as individuals and as teams. Because one thing I wanted to put to you is I just get the sense also that so many of the leadership capacities that people are talking about as being sort of essential for the future of work, I wonder if they're actually, spacious thinking becomes essential in this context, that those leaders who are really stuck in that busyness and doing mode are actually going to get left behind. And I'm curious if there's any research that you've done or seen that sort of speaks to that need, that imperative, as it were, for spacious thinking for, sort of meet the future of work.
Yeah, and it would be unsurprising to say that I completely agree with you there, that the space, given that this is my research, that spaciousness is going to become more and more in the spotlight and more essential. And there is research. I mean, again, watch this. No joke. Watch this space, without a pun intended there. We're looking at that at the moment. Our research doesn't examine that certainly quantitatively. It examines it qualitatively more at the moment. There is lots of research that indicates, pausing benefits things like creativity, levels of innovation, and also relational strength. So there's stuff around pausing. There's also work that, as you slow down, you can go faster. You'll know these sorts of phrases as well. But, we're in a world where the pace, particularly in technology, is at a level that we can't keep up. Actually, we can't possibly keep up at that level, and we shouldn't be trying to, because then we're just busy fools. We wrote an article last year on AI, and it was about the urgent need to be able to just step back into that spacious attention and say, okay, so what are we trying to do with AI? What is our purpose here? What does it, and that demands us to consider what it means to be human. So what is it to live life? What is it to flourish in life as a human being? And to me, that necessarily involves aspects of creativity, of imagination, of relationship. And therefore, that needs to have consequences on, so therefore, what role does AI have in our lives? Perhaps, arguably, don't take away the bits that are making us human, are making us flourish. Rather create ease in our doing mode, where we can create space to be and allow ourselves to be more human. So I think, that the spacious mode may well become more and more urgent and examined over the next few years. I sincerely hope it will. Now is the time to make wise choices. And we don't make wise choices if we are under pressure and trying to keep up and stressed and anxious. So therefore, it has to have a big role, I think.
I agree with you there, Megan. And the pace of technology, especially in the world of work right now, does feel dizzying. And I think when we speak about AI, it's almost framing it as though, what do we need to do as human beings to stay ahead of it, to make sure that we're still relevant in our jobs? I know certainly in creative industries, that's how a lot of people are feeling, is what is the human USP, when we are now fighting for our job against something that can compute trillions of times faster than we can. So it's an interesting call to action that you've given us there, to rather than stay in that kind of rushing river, to sort of step out and have a look at it from a different perspective. And I wonder if you might leave our listeners with a piece of parting advice, Megan, for those who maybe are feeling really overwhelmed, both at work or in the world at large right now. What's something we can do differently when we wake up tomorrow to invite more spaciousness into our life?
Gosh, I could answer that in so many different ways. I'll just revert back to my mindfulness research. In the mindfulness research, again, I'm going to do an acronym. We like our acronyms. We called it AIM. A stands for allowing. So that's that first bit where, and it's such a fundamental and can be quite a scary step when we step back and kind of go, you know what, actually, I don't feel like I'm coping. You know what, I'm close to burnout. I'm feeling really stressed. That allowing that capacity to go, okay, here it is. It is what it is. Let me just look at it. Let me acknowledge it. Let me allow it to be here. Let me know that I'm not alone, because there's so many of us feeling that way. So that's that's the very first thing. I in AIM stands for inquiry. So that, I think, often is done really well with someone, who is somebody that you might just, if you think that you could do with some more space, who is somebody in your life that actually will sit down with you and allow you that space to discover and explore, and also will be with you, because, as I said, it can be a little bit unsettling. And the M is for meta awareness. So it's our ability to notice what we are experiencing. And so for people waking up tomorrow, to go to the very, very practical and pragmatic, see whether you can cut down the noise. So if you're one of these people that, and I will put my hand up to say that, with all my mindfulness research, I can be one of these people that looks at their phone as soon as they wake up or very shortly afterwards, and immediately I fill my mind with noise from the second that I wake up. And then I interact with emails, with the news, with WhatsApp, with whatever it might be. I think one of the really key things we could do for ourselves as a very small first step is to commit in a small way to reduce the noise. So whether that means don't look at your phone straight away, God, have breakfast first, for goodness sake. Look out the window or have a little walk or whatever it might be, just to reduce. Have a walk without a podcast, or apart from this one, obviously. But reduce the noise is a sort of pragmatic thing that I'll come out with after end.
Amazing. Aim space and reduce the noise. In addition to so many other amazing messages that you've shared with us, Megan, I do feel personally very validated, because just before we started, I was telling Lex that I have, as of yesterday, reinstigated my no flight mode until after breakfast policy in my morning routine, after noticing very similarly that it was kind of just, so definitely a really great one for all of us. There's so much we can do, and you've given us so many really beautiful, I think, like inspiring ways, but also practical ways to start to integrate this into our lives and our leadership. Megan, thank you so much for being with us on We Are Human Leaders today. It's been a true delight.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for being with us today on We Are Human Leaders. If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed in this incredible conversation, you can find so much more at the show notes and learn more about the movement of We Are Human Leaders at www.wearehumanleaders.com. As human leaders, we're seeking to lead better, to live truer, and to be the change that we want to see in the world, because we know that's how we recreate workplaces and also the world itself into a place where people can flourish and thrive. We're all human first and leaders second. Thanks for being with us today. We'll see you next time.